Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will call the meeting to order. If there's any declaration of interest, you can clear anytime you see fit during the meeting. Kim, were you going to introduce our guest here today? Or Jennifer?
I certainly can. I certainly can. So through you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. We're really delighted to welcome our consultants on the redevelopment project. So with us today from SHS, we have Ed Starr and Dalton Woodrick, and from Salter Pilon Architects, we have Jerry Pilon. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for making time for us on Friday afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, you guys have the floor. You can go ahead, Ed, or who's ever going to take the lead.
Okay, so we sent over a slide presentation. I don't know, Heather, whether it'd be possible to share the screen.
Yes, I'm
first of all,
just going to do that.
Great. So we'd like to thank everybody for the opportunity to present to the redevelopment committee. And what we've done today is a brief PowerPoint presentation that shows the results of some of our initial research in two areas, well, really in three areas. And that is looking at what is the demand for different sorts of housing options that could accompany the new long-term care home at Rockwood in order to develop a campus of care, giving a variety of housing options for seniors. So Dalton and I have been involved in putting together some research to look at what might make sense given the scale of the market, the need in the area, future projections of aging of the population, and examples of what's worked elsewhere. And we have a sort of a general finding that we would like to share with you. And then Jerry Pilon from Salter Pilon has been engaged with some consultants doing research on service capability of the site, looking at some of the engineering issues and how that leads to development options. So he's going to run you through that. And then he's going to show a couple of specific ideas on how the site could be redeveloped, a couple of different options for consideration. So I'm going to ask Dalton to take us through the basic presentation on the housing options, and then Dalton will turn it over to Jerry, and then we'll open it up for questions. I think we'll
got the wrong slides up, I think.
Yeah, we have to.
Hey Heather, can we have the other set of slides?
So is this the correct? This is the PowerPoint.
Those are Jerry's.
Those are for the architectural that comes second, Heather.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that.
Do you have the other one, Heather? I have it here if you want me to share my screen, if that's easier.
Sure, that would actually be great, Randy. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see what I can pull up here. While that's being pulled up, I just wanted to stress that this is our phase 1 assessment. Phase 2 is the real market assessment. When we'll be doing a detailed financial analysis. So this is more of the background and general context that we're looking at for the Rockwood Terrace redevelopment. So thank you for letting us present our initial findings to you today. Heather, or Randy, can we have the next slide? In the next while, give you an overview of the study, our key phase 1 findings, a little bit about the stakeholder engagement that we've done to date, and then I'll turn it over to Jerry for looking at the site servicing and design concepts information that is in designs that have been developed so far. The purpose of the analysis is to assess the feasibility of building a campus of care community when Rockwood Terrace gets redeveloped into a new 128-bed facility. With the 32-acre property just south of Rockwood Terrace, the county has a unique opportunity to develop not only a long-term care home, but a full campus of care community. to make sure that we're all on the same page on what is a campus of care, it has some different connotations here and there. The one that we're working from is that a campus of care ranges from independent living with some supports to assisted living, long-term care, and in some cases, memory care or palliative care. And these types of communities have become more popular as the demographics in Canada have become older, and there has been some shift in social and economic conditions in the last decade or two. In some cases, individuals, okay, so that's the other piece about this is the campus of care allows people that would otherwise go into long-term care somewhat prematurely to live more independently for longer. And the campus of care is really changing how a retirement home or a retirement community works. Next slide, please. We'll quickly talk about two examples that have a campus of care and long-term care facilities. One of them is Spruce Lodge in Stratford, Ontario. I spoke to their council on Wednesday. This campus is owned and operated by 3 government bodies. So it's a combination of the Perth County, the City of Stratford, and Town of St. Mary's. So there's a lot of collaboration going on there. It's 128-bed long-term care facility, so very much the same size. And then they have 3 towers of various levels of independent and somewhat supported living for seniors. They have garden homes that for fully independent living, but they can access supports if they want to. And that includes congregate dining, so joining others for food service with the long-term care and other buildings. They can access the registered nurse, foot care, and blood pressure clinic that's all on site, and the exercise programs, laundry service, and other day programs. So there's a bunch of things that these independent living seniors can access, and as their needs increase, they can access more of them. Next slide, please. So Georgian Village, completed in 2013 in Simcoe County, and it's beside Georgian Manor. So it's a little bit bigger for the long-term care at 143 beds. And it's about 150 units. And once again, you can see that there is a selection of options that is slightly different than Stratford, that there's life lease in this case. There's affordable rental, and there's assisted living units. Once again, similar amenities. There's an adult day programs, clinic, pharmacy, and hearing aid clinic or care. There's a beauty salon, fitness center, therapeutic pools, and there's a bistro, pub, and piano lounge with billiards. There's also a public library branch there. So you can see between these two campuses, there's different amenities that are included, either fully integrated into the facility or on the same campus location. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll go through some of the key findings from the demographics and other analysis that we've done. What we found is Grey County has a higher proportion of residents over 55 years of age than the provincial average, and more than what normal aging would indicate, that the number of elderly people going 55 and older is increasing instead of having that slow decrease that you would normally see in just a population that doesn't have a lot of in-migration. This suggests that the county is a retirement destination and would benefit from expanded long-term care facilities and more independent living seniors housing. Adding housing diversity will also enable aging in place. There's very little options in Grey County between owning a home and going into a care facility. That there's only about 24.7% rental. Getting up to a third is sort of a healthy rental market. And less than 15% of housing in Grey County is an apartment with 4 or more units. So there's not a lot of opportunity for rent. We're having quite a hard time nailing down what the rent data is. Next slide, please. So here's the graph that shows the age distribution. And we can see that the peak population is in the 55 to 75 age range, and that the 75 plus age range is a larger demographic than the 45 to 50 range. So this indicates that there's a need for both independent and assisted seniors housing in Grey County. Next slide. Awesome. When we looked at the campus size and distribution that might work for Grey County and the site in particular, overall, we're looking at about 100 units of seniors housing, excluding the long-term care. And that it would break down into roughly 30 to 40 seniors assisted living units, 30 units of affordable rental, and 40 market rental units. So this mix creates a mixed income approach that allows for the market units to offset some of the reduced revenues that the affordable units would impose. This is also a mixed community where residents would be able to move between independent and supportive living as their needs change over time. Including the affordable component in the campus is important because it opens up potentially accessing the National Housing Strategy Co-Investment Fund or other funding that would help with the total cost of the project. Next slide. So the built form, we're looking at 3 to 4 story apartments for the assisted living and 3 to 6 stories for the market and affordable rental units. And the final built form is going to require balancing efficient construction and compact land use with community feel and getting the right quality of life for the residents in wider community. Just a bit more on this. With COVID, what we've seen is there's been a lot of rapid change in construction costs and material availability, which is putting pressure on how we want to balance the multi-story and compact land construction with the general look and feel of the buildings. So there's some discussions and there's a lot of things in play right now on this. So next slide, please. So looking at what types of amenities or facilities that could be on site with this campus of care, the property is about 10 minutes from downtown Durham, and there's limited seniors focused amenities in Durham. So providing more amenity on the campus would attract residents and benefit the community as a whole. Finding that right balance between marketability, so providing all those amenities, and affordability is going to be critical. Our early engagement suggests that a strategy that leans into what brings people to Grey County is going to be key when we select amenities and build form. So creating a campus that responds to local community needs, not just a generic retirement community, will be necessary to maintain the full occupancy and attract sufficient rent prices. Something to keep in mind is that many, if not most, of the long-term care facilities nearby are being renewed. So having a new long-term care facility won't be exceptional. It'll be sort of the norm in the wider community. So the campus will have to differentiate itself from higher-end offerings on Lake Huron or in communities like Kincardine and Collingwood. Exploring what attracts people to Grey County and around Durham specifically is part of the next stage of our stakeholder engagement, really figuring out what makes people come here and stay here. Looking at rent ranges. So this is our preliminary data, and we're going to need to explore this further in our next stage to really nail down what the rents would be in the pro forma that makes for a financially sustainable project. So rents for seniors housing with services and access with services or access to services varies widely. And some of the key benchmarks that we found in our phase 1 research is that affordable rent for independent living seniors is as low as $600 a month. Seniors on a pension can afford about $545 a month on their income. And rents in the secondary rental market range between $900 to $1,200 a month. So refining the rents and how much can be charged for services is where we're going to dig into next. But this is giving us sort of some benchmarks on where the affordable piece may land and where the entry level into the independent living and market units might land also. Next slide, please. We've talked to a number of organizations and people, and here I'd like to talk a little bit about what we heard. So next slide. Generally, the people and organizations that we've talked with are aware of other campuses, that the Simcoe County, Schlegel Villages and Morningside Villages were all mentioned. There's an interest for the ability to keep pets. And there's an interest in getting a balance of programming, so programmed use and unstructured use of the spaces and facilities. The library came up as a possible partnership and may help with the non-program space management. The high school and daycare nearby also was brought up a number of times as an opportunity to establish intergenerational interactions. So it's not just a seniors residence for seniors, it's a place where the entire community can meet and interact. One of the quotes that came through and we heard a few times is that some people argue that seniors will be selling their homes and can afford higher pricing. The house may be given to the kids and that we should assume people are living on their pensions. And so the pricing wise, subsidized housing is around $700 a month. People are saying that incomes are $2,000, which is bang on what we find when we do the calculations. And life lease is something that's being discussed. In the interactions we've had so far, there hasn't been a lot of interest in the life lease. And we became aware that Owen Sound had a group that tried life leases, and it took between 4 and 5 years to sell those. So the life lease option, we didn't explore much further. Next slide. Looking at the general community, I liked these two quotes, that older people are rooted in their ways. There needs to be a contribution that makes them feel comfortable in the facility. Farming is in their blood, being an entrepreneur. Cannot stop giving them something productive to do every day. The other one was put ourselves in their shoes. What would our parents feel like living there? I thought those were two really good ways to think about what type of community Grey County needs and Durham. The suggestions that came out of these stakeholder engagements included gathering places, a parkette, hair salon, explore moving the library here and creating a hub that includes programming and services that the library would provide. The comment was the nursing home is jammed and was originally a seniors home. There was a lot of interest in outdoor opportunities for seniors, not just indoor opportunities, and comments that there's lots of youth recreation, but not a lot targeted to seniors. The idea of a new facility being able to bring in high-speed internet and having sort of a community and infrastructure hub for learning was something that came up a couple of times. And because there's a local hospital, this might also be a draw for the surrounding areas. Next slide. So the amenities and functionality that were further explored. This slide talks about exterior and activity spaces. The next slide is going to talk about interior activities. There was a lot of discussion around keeping a rural feel, if at all possible, in the design. Having something like an outdoor pavilion where people can be visiting the campus and access Wi-Fi and be able to see people that live nearby is something that would be desirable. Having a walking track, something that would replace what the Legion provides, partially because the Legion isn't fully accessible. The idea of a community garden came up, and a food garden, looking at Owen Sound, they bring in a horticulturalist, or a nutritionist, I should say, that works with the seniors to talk about how can you make different types of food with the community garden that they have there. And just in general, wanting to see lots of outdoor space, which matches sort of the outdoor feel of the community. Lawn bowling, carpet bowling, horseshoe pits, barbecue areas were all mentioned. Next slide. For interior spaces or amenities, the stakeholders indicated that there's a general gap in personal care and day programs available locally, that Durham doesn't have a retirement home for assisted living, that there could always be more respite and day programs available. There was lots of support for the idea of having congregate dining, or possibly having Meals on Wheels being offered out of the facility. Charging stations for electric wheelchairs and scooters. Gray Gables came up where it has a little bit more space than some of the other seniors residences. And the observation was it was easier to adjust to COVID with that slightly larger overall space. Need to include a package delivery room, and there was a fair bit of support for that added security and self-security that cameras would provide. Next slide, please. So what's being worked on at this point, our sort of base case, is putting together the new Rockwood Terrace campus with 128 beds of long-term care, something that in the range of 30 to 40 seniors assisted living units, 30 units of affordable rental, and 40 market rental units. Next slide. So now I'll hand it over to Jerry Pilon to walk through the initial concepts.
May I suggest that I offer the committee an opportunity to ask questions on your first part of your presentation first?
Of course, Mr. Chair.
And I cannot see the committee, so if you have any questions, please speak up. Any questions from the committee? And I have one question. I'm just curious. I realize you're early in your report and so on, but I didn't notice any pharmacies or drugstores mentioned in your presentation. Is that something that would be in something like this?
That is possible. The challenge with a pharmacy, for example, is that you need a company to come in and provide it. That we could make space in the facility that could accommodate a pharmacy. You would then need to find a pharmacist that would be interested in leasing that space and establishing a pharmacy is the challenge. Things like a library, because that's municipally owned, you can just say that the library is going to be there. So that is why we haven't explicitly said that there would be something like a pharmacy.
I could add to that, Dalton. I think, in future more detailed work, actual programming development will form part of that with more detailed input. As an example, I can tell you at Simcoe, or at Georgian Village, when we did that, working with the county, there was a conscious decision made early on to dedicate a certain amount of space in the village square for commercial retail endeavors. And throughout the course of developing the project and construction, the county worked to engage different groups. So that's where the small satellite pharmacy came in, where the audiologist came in, where the medical clinic came in, podiatrist, all those, because they were given opportunities to have, a captive audience within the community itself there, that they could run a small little storefront commercial retail piece there within the village square without, moving it wholeheartedly. Now, there are some places that want to have more foot traffic come in and make it a viable location for a dedicated pharmacy so others can come in. So there's lots of discussion has to happen during the programming stages to decide what makes the most sense for this campus setting this environment for sure. But that's where those opportunities come up.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Christine, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I must say, Dalton and Jerry, I'm really enjoying the presentation. I just wanted to mention that I believe you had identified a high school. I just wanted to say that that's a junior school. If you're referring to Spruce Ridge Community School, that's JK to 8. So just FYI to that. And I wondered if there was any opportunity of like a wellness hub where residents in that particular area may be interested in yoga or a spa, something along that line of sort of like a retail, but on the wellness type sector. Thank you for your time.
Dalton, you want me to answer that quickly?
Yeah, why don't you?
Okay, through Mr. Chair, once again, that will come when we come to the programming piece of this to understand, how much square footage can a business model pro forma for this type of campus support. I can tell you in other campus settings that we're currently working on, there are wellness hubs that form part of that. And it involves multi-purpose meeting spaces that also then have the ability to have, seniors fitness and yoga and other things like that. So they're really focused on creating multi-purpose spaces, not purpose-specific spaces. So you get the best beneficial use for the highest percentage of time while the facility's there based on your investment. So I think those are things that make a lot of sense and should be investigated once a more detailed programming piece takes place. But, all of these things add square footage. So it becomes the art of the possible with what has to be done, because, I always tend to be the practical bad guy. Sorry, Kim. But, the idea is that there's lots of things that would be great to have. It's a matter of, given the mass of the housing units and the types they are and the revenue they will generate, what can be realistically supported in that campus setting that's affordable. And so there's all these, it's like juggling all these balls in the air to try and see where you get the point where there's the right balance of the housing mixture, the different price points for rental to meet the community need, and then also the broader community needs for, enhancing seniors campus with wellness and all those other pieces. So I'm not really trying to dodge the question on that, but it is a balance for those kinds of things. So we can't just keep on adding a program piece until we know what the campus will really be able to support overall.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, if I might, just one more supplementary question.
Go ahead, Christine.
So it might be an odd question, and hopefully it's properly placed here. But were the housing inventory looking at resident builds that do not have basements, or will there be a combination of structures or residential units that have basements and not? Thank you.
So I'll quickly respond to that. We haven't finished the designs yet, so we don't know 100%, but we do know that there is a lot of topographical changes. So there's definitely going to be some height differences between some of the locations, but at this point, I don't believe we were looking at a lot of sort of independent houses with basements. It's more of small apartments. Jerry, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can do that. I mean, when we go through the concept, you'll see shortly, we're not proposing in their current setup anything with independent type garden home setups, which may be where basements are typical and common for people that, in your house, you have your basements. We, for years, have been following the model that when we do any kind of seniors housing, we also want it to be kind of flexible in terms of universal access. And so we avoid stairs and multi-levels, because that's where falls can happen, other things happen. So when you do that, you tend to, even though it's an independent living setting, it's better if you can keep it all on one level. Then there's multiple points of flexibility. A good example would be a couple that's living independently, but they live in that type of environment. But over time, one of the partners has mobility issues over time and needs a walker, needs something else. Well, all of a sudden, half of the living environment isn't accessible to them, and we typically don't design them with lifts and stuff internal because it just becomes too costly to afford. So we look more to a kind of a single level model to give that flexibility and universal access design kind of approach to things. I think what Dalton was referring to is when we talk about the concept scheme shortly, with the grade differences on that site, we will have areas where the main level is at one grade, but then there's a lower level that we'll call, like, you know, I won't call it a basement, the lower level that kind of helps bridge that transition in grade, where we can put some amenities and programs, but we typically try not to do that within the independent living units themselves.
Thank you for your time.
Corridors are accessed by the main elevator core, so everyone has access to it, and it makes sense to transition.
Thank you, Christine. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, and thank you for your time.
I'm not sure who's going to take over now. Is it Jerry or is it Dalton?
I think there's a couple of questions still.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, I cannot see you. Go ahead, Brian.
Brian Millen. As you mentioned that this would be approximately 10-minute walk downtown. I'm wondering how important is that to have it, you know, a walkable distance to a downtown or a retail area. And, you know, I'm thinking for someone like yourself or me, it would be 10 minutes. Someone like Councillor O'Leary, it might take them 20 minutes to walk. I just wondering about the relativity of that.
In general, making sure that you're active as long as possible in your life is a good thing for your mental health and your physical health. So being 10 minutes away or maybe 15 minutes away, depending on how fast you're walking, and having a place to go is always a good thing. So keeping a long-term care facility near your downtown and the rest of the amenities in your community is really important for the well-being and community building that this facility and campus can provide.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. And I know, O'Leary, if it was 15 minutes, that's good too.
Mr. Chair, I have a question if I could. It's Brian.
Go ahead, Brian.
You know, I really miss the cash because Brian usually picks on him when he's around. I guess I'm second fiddle. Christine asked about the basement. I guess I have to ask about the roof or roof design. What is the fascination with a flat roof? In Owen Sound, we have the rec center, the Bayshore Community Center, City Hall. Like every flat roof, we have leaks. The rec center leaked 2 years after we built it. Does anyone do anything other than flat roofs on new building?
I can answer that if you like. Yeah, we have combinations of flat and slope roofs. In most buildings like that you see that have flat roofs, it's usually driven by the fact that there's usually mechanical equipment up there that needs to have access and serviceability, and those are difficult to place on slope roofs. So most of the roofs that you will see on any type of civic or institutional building that look like they have a sloped edge to them usually have a false wall behind it that goes back down with a flat section of roof where all the mechanical equipment is on rooftop mounts that are hidden because it still remains accessible. So it becomes more of an aesthetic thing than not. When there's roofs that leak, somebody's messed up somewhere, either by design or by construction. So they shouldn't always leak on you. But you know, it does happen. It does happen. And then depending on the type and the quality of the roof that's put in to start, you know, there's been cases where you design a perfectly good roof and it's installed perfectly, but then a guy goes up there and does some mechanical work and starts cutting tin and, you know, leaves all the tin scraps on there, and then everybody walks on them for a year, and all of a sudden you've got holes everywhere in your roof and no one can understand why it leaks. Well, there's an easy answer for that when you walk up and you see all the screws that were left there and all the tin, but it happens. So I think, you know, it's just part of good detailing and design, and whatever makes sense to make sure that the building serves a bunch of different needs. So I wouldn't say that everyone thinks flat roofs are always great. I mean, they serve a purpose, but, you know, depending on when you're trying to create some more, you know, of a residential feel and smaller things, there's ways to detail that architecturally that you can do while still meeting all the other needs of serviceability and supporting mechanical equipment and other things like that.
Thank you.
I cannot see the committee, so if is there any other any other questions from committee or even staff? I have one other question maybe you guys could answer before we move forward is, has the site been very challenging for accessibility?
Well, I mean, I'll try to speak to that a bit when we go through it, but I think the whole idea is that we need to come up with a concept plan for the campus that is fully accessible. And so how we design the buildings and the different components of the campus to make them fully accessible on all levels is the important part. So we will use the kind of foundations of the building and everything else to help deal with those grade transitions. I'd be naive to tell you we're not going to get into some retaining walls here and there. But you know, we will have to find a way that we design it so that everything is accessible on all levels. Because we don't intend for there to be areas that are only accessible through stairs and everything else. We want to make sure that we have at-grade access to all areas of the building. The whole facility, to be a proper campus of care, should have universal access and universal design principles applied throughout it. And so that means that every area should be, I mean, you know, with the exception of maybe dedicated mechanical spaces that don't have general public access, I would say as a general rule, all accessible spaces for people that their living environments and their public spaces and everything else, and any admin spaces all need to follow that universal access and design principle.
Thank you for that. Is there any other questions from the committee at this time? Seeing none, so please go ahead with your rest of your presentation.
All right, thanks, Randy. All right, so through you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the committee here, what I'm going to try and do is kind of walk you through the kind of rationale on what we've done in terms of an approach to how to develop this site. So as you can see on this slide, this is the red line outlines the area of your 32 acres. And you can see where we have, you know, Sadler Street and Kincardine, and then Rock Street that comes down where the existing Rockwood Terrace is. So we looked at all this on the site and the topography, looked at, you know, the historic land use and what was there, and kind of tried to do an analysis at a number of levels. So if we could move to the next slide, please, Randy. So to start, one of the things we did is we engaged with GM Blue Plan to look at an overall servicing analysis, because when we looked at the site, you know, not all areas of that 32-acre site have easy access to site servicing, which is a requirement to build anything. Next slide, if we could, Randy. So when you look at it in the greater context of the rest of the streets and the surrounding areas, you can see the highlighted area for the property, and you can see where the streets are that directly kind of wrap the site. What we challenged GM Blue Plan to do was look at some basic servicing and access to services that would influence how we would approach development of the site. And that would be things such as water, sanitary, gas, stormwater, things like that. Next slide, please. So with water to start, you can see the site in context blown up a little bit now, in a little closer, and you can see where the blue stars are, hopefully. Those are points of possible water connection. So basically possible connection points at South Street East and Rock Street, and even carrying over to Kincardine South there. So there's an opportunity. That would be our primary points of connection for water. So we looked at it and said, well, obviously we have to be close to where we have access to water and services. And I can tell you with a lot of campus settings, we also like to have either closed loops and not dead end water systems, or have the ability for redundancy on water systems. So when there's a failure in a main on one area, we can valve off and still have supply, especially when you have a care setting. You know, for the affordable housing assisted living pieces, we designed to best practice and standards that the ministries put forward. But for long-term care, we have to follow ministry long-term care guidelines, and they're a bit more strict about what we have to do and the standards we have to follow. The other thing that's important about these pieces and access to the water demand is at Rock Street, we have a fire hydrant, and the peak flow demand pressure there is 49 PSI and a fire flow demand of 52 liters a second. And that's information that has been provided to GM Blue Plan by Wes Gray. So those are good numbers. And that means that, you know, ideally in any seniors campus setting, we will be looking to hopefully provide this with a sprinklered system for life safety, fire and life safety. So having access to good pressure and things like that is important. Next slide, please. When we start to look at sanitary, you'll start to see where the access points are again. So possible sanitary connection points, you know, once again, South Street East or Rock Street, Sadler Street intersection. Those are the two. So we start to see a theme with where water and sanitary access is, which is not unusual. We also then know that, you know, that there's certain things that we have to look at where the inverts are. So some of that's unknown at this time. We weren't able to gather that data yet. So there will be some work that has to be done on that. But we know that the diameters are similar throughout the network. So the connection would be more direct route. The South Street connection would be more direct route to the wastewater treatment plant on the west side of Durham. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well. You know, so I guess when there were initial discussions, some capacity concerns were noted in the sanitary system, but the locations of those haven't been identified. So there will have to be ongoing discussions to decide where those are, if they're downstream, so to speak, and if there's bottlenecks in the ability to kind of get a line and capacity to go there. So that's a level of detail that we'll have to investigate further. But for now, we're looking at where are options for servicing connects for sanitary. Next slide, please. Stormwater. Stormwater is interesting in that the site itself has actually 3 catchment areas when you look at the topographical analysis that's done on it. So the southeast corner drains to a ditch that flows southwest. The central portion appears to drain to the low area on the site with an overflow storm sewer on Rock Street. And then the west portion of the site, it likely infiltrates directly to the south, is our guess. Each of them have a different area and things like that. So infiltration is probably going to be the main drainage outlet under the existing conditions, given the past use as a quarry, as stated there. So at some point, more detailed geotechnical work will be done to kind of look at hydraulic natures of the soils and things like that to know that what we can and can't do, you know, and see where the water tables are across the site itself. But at the high level, we know that we have a strategy for trying to deal with stormwater as it stands right now. Next slide, please. So this is some contour mapping that was done. So it notes, you know, a 200 diameter sewer, you know, from West Gray. That tends to be small for stormwater, especially when we're talking about a larger catchment area. The challenges that we're seeing right now are the west portion of the site may not have an adequate outlet based on the contours that we're seeing. But it appears ultimately that, you know, we will be able to find a way to do something. And we have to then look at some of the information isn't appearing on GIS mapping. So more detailed investigation will be required before any detailed design proceeds. But, you know, there's next steps that we have to do for that work. Next slide, please. And then gas, just typically to say that, you know, the service that's been shown on part of the site already has been shown as abandoned. We weren't able to get anything, so we have to add more detail to it. But my suspicion, of course, is that it's right along the same points where we have sanitary access and water access for all utilities. And then there's been an initial contact with Bell Canada and Hydro One, but we haven't got any detailed feedback yet. So that's gas servicing at a high level. I don't want to dwell on all those things too much because I'll get into the meat of what we're going to do here. So we looked at 2 options. And so I spend most of my time going through option 1 because option 2, I'm going to lay my cards down and say I'm biased. I don't think it's as good an approach, and I'll get to why I think that when we get there. But I'd like to walk you through the concept plan we've developed based on that initial site analysis work that we discussed just shortly here, and the work that Dalton and Ed have done to date with the feasibility and components that are required. So next slide, please, Randy. So what we are looking to do is, I'm going to zoom in on another slide in a second, but I just wanted to show you in the context of the overall site plan of what we were trying to do. And what you'll see is the outline to the north. North is at the top of the site. There's a black line through the parking lot that shows the outline of the existing Rockwood Terrace. And so our option here presumes that there will be a phased building approach to the site, but that the ultimate build out will involve the demolition of the existing Rockwood Terrace. The whole approach is one that we try to limit the development footprint. The area to the east is where we have some of our greater soil and topographical challenges and things like that. And we also noted a reference to need for parkland and access in the future. But a lot of what's driving this approach to how to develop this site is the servicing availability. Because as we noted at the intersection, of Rock and Sadler, and even in Kincardine and South Street East, as we come across the other way, those are going to be the points that we have to run services to connect and be able to service this facility. If we start to move farther to the east on the site, we're running into heights and grades and invert challenges and connection challenges that would have some real significant servicing cost premiums. So we took that seriously when we tried to look at what would the art of the possible be here. So what you can see as a simple descriptor approach is the idea would be that we would extend Rock Street south, and we would take South Street East and bring it right over and come across, and whether Kincardine ties in as well in the future, that's to be debated. But that would basically frame off the extent of our developable site area. And we're considering it to be part of the new land acquisition that is part of the 32 acres and the inclusive site area of the existing Rockwood Terrace. So on that east-west line that's on an angle between the junior school and Rockwood Terrace, that red line that you see, that's an area where we also see some significant transition in grades and things like that nature. So what we are seeing is the idea that our main floor level of the buildings to the south, those components, they're at a different grade than the main floor level of those three little small components to the north. So if we go to the next slide, Randy, we can look at it in more detail. So basically what I'm saying is building 1 and 2 would be at a slightly lower grade level, and buildings 3, 4, and 5 would be at a slightly higher grade level. And that's where those partial basement ideas would come in, where we have transition and we'd use those buildings to, you see south of the area dictated as 4, that would be a courtyard at the main level of building 1 and 2. And then the lower level of building 3 would be the link and physical access across to the other pieces. So I'll walk you through that right now. So building 1 is the 128 bed LTC. We talked about it potentially being 3 stories if we have any servicing below. We can really fit it on a 2-story footprint. As 128 beds, we would be, this layout shows basically 2 32-bed RHAs per floor, which meets the ministry guidelines. The idea here would be that building 2 would be the village square piece. So when we're talking about the commercial and the amenity spaces and all those things that form part of a village square that I refer to it as, they are what is the link between the long-term care and then the other housing component types that form part of the campus of care. So the main entrance to the long-term care and basically to the campus would be through the village square on level 2, and then controlled access into the long-term care piece in 1. There's the main drop-off area and a canopy there, the main visitor parking and the access drop-off loop at the front. which is the parking lot along the Rock Street extension to the east. To the west of buildings 1 and 2 is the main servicing and support areas for the long-term care in Village Square. The parking lot there is designed to be the parking lot to deal primarily with staff parking for the long-term care piece. And while it seems like a lot of parking, we also have to size the parking lots for shift change and staff changeover. So it always ends up being more than just what the bylaw asks for. Then what we've done is we've wrapped that with the service access piece at that lower level, which is where we come in with our shipping, receiving, food service, delivery, all that kind of good stuff. So we keep that out of the front door and keep it away from the residents. And it's a back of house feed for the facility itself. When we then start to move north on the site, building 3 is the assisted living component. So it will be on level 1 for that will be the equivalent of the second floor of 1 and 2, if that helps understand that. It will be a 3-story with a partial basement, which will house the 30 plus units for assisted living. Building 4 is basically the lobby link. It's also where we make our transition in grade with an elevator down to the other level, to the outdoor courtyards and gardens and things like that. And it's also the way that we link buildings 3 and 4 and 5 together, building 5 being the affordable and market rental. And what it also does, if you can see how all those components are physically linked, it means there is the ability to have direct access to all the building components, you know, in the middle of January without forcing someone to walk outside and everything else. So that is really important. We find that, you know, forcing people to walk outside and navigate ramps and things like that is just not a desirable thing to do. So we can deal with those transitions in grade. And that approach helps us deal with some of those grade issues as we move from north to south. The component 5, I should mention, is mentioned at 5 to 6 stories. We can probably keep it to 5 with a partial basement. And the affordable and market rental is going to be an interesting one and a challenge. So our understanding is that, you know, when you commit to affordable and market, what we've done on similar projects is we design them as basically similar unit types. And you're only required with the ministry to commit to your number of affordable units, you know, just before you get occupancy. So what it allows you to do is have that flexibility of where you are in the market with affordable versus market rental and not have to make major design changes or shifts in the future or partway through construction when you commit to those numbers and know where your CMHC funding is and all those good things. So it is a kind of a design approach for flexibility. I should also mention that, you know, when we talked about this before, Dalton hinted at the fact about COVID and impacts and costs. Even those, most of these are, you know, 2 and 3 story buildings with the exception of the other one, and you could build them out of wood frame. We tend to like non-combustible construction. You know, in days gone by, we used to have some for-profit and even not-for-profit clients in the seniors housing and long-term care sectors that would for those types of buildings move to a wood frame structure. Wood's gone up 180% in the last 12 months. So the economics behind a wood frame structure have been far offset with the cost premiums, let alone if it's available when you need it to construct these days. And then what we're finding is clients are saying, well, if I'm not going to get that economic benefit in the capital build, I know that if I move to a non-combustible, I'm going to save it on operating costs with insurance costs and everything else. So it does make for a more durable building over time. And that's what we would be looking at, suggesting you consider moving this forward. The last piece then is obviously the parking lot to the north of 3, 4, and 5. And that's where we put our dedicated parking areas, you know, to support the assisted living and the market and affordable, just keeping it separate from the main LTC Village Square piece, which makes sense. I can tell you on some of the pieces we're working at now, there is a comment that, you know, well, we'd love structured parking Underground parking structures are not cheap. And so I don't know that that's in the cards for the housing types that you're talking about. But one of the things we have done in terms of a sustainable design approach is we've actually put on these covered solar arrays that act as a carport over the parking lot, and it gives us solar panels that basically provide photovoltaics and energy to the buildings and provide a dual purpose of providing covered parking of cars. Those are details for the future. But anyway, that's really that we've discussed in the first way we looked at it, because there's also flexibility.
Rob, do you want to mute everybody and then just let Jerry? All right, try again, Jerry.
Yeah, sorry, I was getting a feedback loop there. I started feeling I was talking to myself. The other piece to mention is, now that you have the approval on the long-term care, there's a good likelihood that may need to be built first in a phased approach. And also the fact that, you can see the footprints of the other buildings. While it would be possible to build those other buildings and maintain occupancy of the existing Rockwood Terrace, they don't have to be built in the same phase per se. But buildings 1 and 2, building 2 is needed at the same time as 1 to provide the support and everything else. So those are the pieces that would kind of come into play in the first stage anyway, in any phased build approach. But in the overall build approach to this option, what we would see happening is you build phase 1 and 2, and then you could build 3, 4, and 5 at the same time, or it could happen later. But once 1 and 2 are built and ready for occupancy, you decant and bring people into 1 and 2, and then you can demolish the other building and move on and finish it out. But there's different things to consider for phased building approaches with mobilizing, remobilizing, construction costs, and things like that. So those are details for another day. But as an overall concept plan, we think this is one that we tried to look at that makes sense to get the building components that form part of the study that Dalton and Ed did that seem to be supportable for this campus of care model, and trying to keep a minimized footprint that is serviceable without excessive site premiums for servicing and everything else, while maintaining a good balance of the site to the east for future uses, parkland, perhaps other development, whatever. Because, in the world we're in with construction costs now, smaller footprints tend to be more economical than big sprawling ones too. So we've also been conscious of that. So next slide, please, Dalt or Randy. So option 2, I already told you what I think of that, which is probably a bad way to present, but it's Friday. Next one, please. So it's basically the same idea, but we've taken out, if you go to the next one, then what's done is building 6 becomes the affordable housing units, and building 5 becomes just market rental, and it becomes a smaller footprint. Obviously, the new construction would make sense to do for the market rental, and then whatever you can rejig out of the existing Rockwood for affordable would be how that would work. Now, I can tell you from what we've seen of the building and listened to in terms of condition assessments and everything else, we've got the drawings of the original facility that Randy sent through and looked at it, and the type of construction it is. It will not be an easy building to renovate even into affordable housing. Their center corridors and they're narrow. The depth of the rooms is small, so you take up lots of space along the length of the envelope to even fit in, 1 and 2 bedroom units that will be compromised. The building envelope, there's a lot of load-bearing masonry that will be difficult to deal with. The floor heights are low for putting in HVAC and support space units that meet current standards. There's all kinds of challenges that would be there that I don't think necessarily make it the most viable option in investing money in a building that's already, nearing end of useful life. So that would be my biased opinion. But I think it also is a bit more of a compromise and not as integrated approach to the campus setting as the option one piece was. But we thought we'd look at, you know, is it because someone's probably going to ask someone, why are you just throwing that building away? Why didn't you look at it? And so I think the idea is that we can say we had a high level look and review, and that given the existing quality of the structure and the demands that would ultimately probably leave you with a compromised affordable housing solution, and not necessarily solve, you know, the refurb issues that the building has currently, that those dollars are probably better spent and more economically spent in a concurrent new construction with the component 5, which for the other reasons I mentioned with affordable and market, giving you that flexibility in the future. So that's it. I probably talked way too long, but I tried to get as much in as we could. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to try and answer whatever we can.
Thank you, Jerry. What a wonderful concept. It's really good. I cannot see everybody, but I believe I see Brian. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Jerry. That was a great presentation. First of all, I'm glad to hear you talk about option 2 the way you were talking, because I think that's just the difference between doing it right and not doing it right. If you may as well have a new building and do it right, and then you don't have to worry. But I wanted to ask about I know you talked about the underground parking being expensive. Back to the roof thing, you know, all these utilities that you have on a flat roof, you could have in an underground parking. And I wonder is the cost really that significant by having underground parking? Because, you know, I'm also thinking, looking at the plan, that maybe, you know, in 20 years or so, or 25 years, if you need to expand, that's where you would expand, where you have the parking lots now. Thoughts on that for starters?
Sure. So, well, I can tell you, I understand and appreciate what you're saying. There's only certain mechanical spaces you can put in a underground parking garage and basement, because you need access to walls with louvers for intakes and exhausts and everything else. So we can't exactly just bury it in the bottom of we will need shafts and things like that for mechanical spaces. It's not that it's not done. We do it on compact sites and everything else. But I can tell you, underground parking costs range anywhere from $120 to $145 a square foot. And for every parking space, you're probably looking at about 350 to 380 square feet. So you can do that math in a hurry, and those spaces aren't cheap. So, I mean, an underground parking structure here, I mean, even if we'd had one that was of a critical mass, let's say it's only 80, you're talking about, you're probably talking about somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $5 million just for structured parking. And so that's expensive. When we can get surface spots for close to 5,000 a piece, not 45 or 50. So that's really the net difference.
The other thing I would add is our experience is not only the construction costs of underground parking, but the long-term maintenance costs. You get a lot of cracking and difficulties in underground parking, and being able, if you're in affordable housing, which has kind of a limited revenue return, to be able to come up with that kind of money in the long run to maintain the parking is also a big challenge. So it's very difficult in this kind of a campus.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Kim,
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry.
Kim,
I
before I go,
just had one more. You mentioned staff parking, so I got that checked off.
Brian, can I interrupt just for a minute, please?
Yep.
Heather, would you be able to put the screen back the way it was? Because all I see is Kim on the screen.
Sorry.
Don't mind looking at her, but is there any way to put the screen back?
I think, Mr. Chair, and Rob can correct me, if you go to gallery view.
Up in the corner.
Rather than speaker view.
There we go. Okay, thank you. You educated me. Okay, go ahead, Brian. I believe you're still on.
Okay, so I just wanted to ask about, in terms of design, is there any thought or talk about having places for natural light for the seniors? I know you're always looking for efficiencies, and I don't know what the R value is in glass these days, but I'm just wondering, like, you talked about a village square, or is there a place where we can get these seniors more natural light?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I can say that as a designer, I'm a big fan of natural light and a big fan of a lot of glass. We like to design where there's as much natural light as possible. It's not only that there are very efficient window systems out there these days that we can design to that aren't as terrible as they were in the late 70s and early 80s. They can be very efficient. And what they cost you for thermal value and some heat loss, they make up for in natural light and energy savings there. But it's the intangible qualities of them for natural light is a good thing for the health and well-being of people, especially seniors, especially in January and February. So I think we try to design spaces that have as much natural light as we can get in there. The one thing I didn't mention when we were talking about it is in the LTCs, you probably saw that they look like they had these two courts in the middle. So every resident room in that LTC has, by the ministry standards, is mandated to have a window that has a maximum sill height of 2 feet off the floor and a minimum width and area of glazing. So every room has an abundance of natural light, every resident room. We tend to make walls of glass in all our dining rooms, and the village squares usually have major expanses of glass because then we try to fit in greenhouses and other things like that, and just kind of nice environments that way. We're big fans of at the end of every hallway, you're not staring at a door or a wall. There's a window with a view. As you then turn the corner, there's a window at the end of that hall with another view. It's very simple gestures, but they go a long way in the overall quality of the built environment. So, we're not there yet. I mean, our task was just to do a high level site plan. And I think we're probably, getting really deep into that, but I'm happy to tell you that, that would be what I would suggest you'd want to do and should do. And then to my point about that courtyard scheme, there's different ways you can shape an RHA. We intentionally did that because it creates a walk around loop in each RHA. So when you get to dementia care and memory care, things like that, dead end corridors are not a good thing for those type of residents. And so to have the ability for a walk around loop is very important. And it also then provides the courtyard at grade as a secure courtyard. So what you end up with is the flexibility over time when you design the RHAs that way, that one RHA that maybe is not a special care, with the increase in demand for that type of use, can easily convert to a special care without significant rebuild. It's a minor modification. So that was an element of that layout that I forgot to mention.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
I believe you were up next.
I'm okay. My point has been covered, so thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Christine. Welcome, Ms. Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello, Mr. Warden as well. I just want to say, Jerry, I really appreciate the candidness and the professionalism on your recommendations. And I was going to ask what your grouping recommendation would be, whether it would be option 1 or option 2. So I appreciate all the information that you provided, identifying that option 2 is the way to go. Just a question, and it probably is one that's far out to be answered, but would the demo, should this proceed with option 1, which is the premise of my question, would the demolition take place prior to the build, or is there any thought in terms of how that would take place, recognizing it's a question kind of out there a bit? Thanks.
So we've just looked at it at a high level for now. By virtue of the footprint that's there and everything else, we haven't looked at where the servicing comes in. I know that, there's a service access drive that comes in because there's multiple access points to parking lot areas. There's all the chairs and the smoking table out there on the corner too. That might get lost with hoarding. But I would say that you could build it all in one phase and keep the existing there and then demolish it in due course, or it could be a phased implementation and approach. But you know, I think a more detailed analysis in due course will be required to make that assessment.
Fair enough, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. As the chair, I'd like to ask a question, if you don't mind. You said you hired an engineer to look at the sites to do, say, water and sewer and so like that. Is it the job of the consultant to go from the site rate completely down to the sewage plant itself? In other words, follow a scheme to make sure the infrastructure is take it?
So the quick answer is no. However, in many cases, certain municipalities don't have, depending on the state of their model, whether it's their water model or their sewer model and things like that, sometimes they have independent third-party engineering consultants that do that work for them. And then they put it back on our consulting team to do the downstream analysis to show where the kind of bottlenecks are, if you will. So usually it's a bit of a give and take on that front. I don't know, Randy, if you have anything you want to add to that, but I mean, it'll really be, there will be more of a collaboration with West Grey to kind of understand what are the limitations and how do we go about doing that. So it's very much, we're happy we brought on GM Blue Plan. They're very familiar with the site, very familiar with the area and the municipality as well. So I'm pretty sure that is a good start to this process.
Yeah, just further to that, absolutely. I think that's part of the next steps is some further discussions with West Grey with respect to some of the servicing aspects related to not just in and around the site, but overall in terms of future plans and what's on the capital plans, what's as part of their development charges, etc. So that's something that we'll definitely be working with. They're already in discussions with Vance, their director of public works and engineering at West Grey. So yeah, those discussions are happening as we speak, but yeah, for sure we'll need to look into some of that analysis further, and hopefully at the next task force meeting we'll have some further information with respect to that.
Thank you. Before I go to Brian, thanks, Randy. I would hope that would be something we look at right at the early stages of the project, because it is quite a major project we're suggesting here, and it could be a tremendous hardship if we don't look at that infrastructure going from A to B, if you know what I mean. And is the capacity there to be able to service this kind of a development? It's just questions I was thinking about, that's all.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we wanted to have some of that engineering analysis done even at this high level concept stage, just so we're getting into some of those discussions and can start planning accordingly in collaboration with West Grey.
You go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just real quickly, a comment talking about what you were talking about. If you're going to keep that rural or that farm theme going, a liquid manure tank would hold a lot of stuff. But anyway, my real question was to Dalton. Why are we limiting ourselves to approximately, I think, was it 100 units of ASL and market units? There seems to be a lot of demand for assisted living and smaller market units. Is there not more demand for units like that, or are we limiting ourselves because of the infrastructure as we were previously talking about?
So the 100 units is not associated with the infrastructure. We hadn't finished that analysis when we were at that point. What we were looking at is how much demand we think there might be in the community. And we used a couple of different ways to come to those numbers. And we feel quite confident that the 100 units would fill quite quickly. But we also feel that there would be potentially more demand, and that would lead to possibly a second phase, or as the project progresses, the opportunity to re-gauge just how much interest you have. But the 100 units is sort of on the safer side, so we aren't overstretching and potentially building units that can't be filled, is where we're at.
Right. Right.
And I would
I'm-
just also,
Go ahead.
sorry, just to add, I think part of the exercise also, when we looked at the scale of things like Georgian Village in Penetanguishene, which is a larger community, they really didn't add too many more units than what we've seen here. And even at that, it took a little while to fill. For example, their life lease units had to be rented out at the end of the day, and it took a while to fill that up, and in a much larger community. So keeping in mind the scale of the community and what succeeded in other places, we felt, going with a number that was fairly cautious would be in the best interest of the county.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. No, that's fine. It's just Grey County's not noted for being real conservative in their numbers, but nonetheless, I'm talking numbers, not politics. But anyway, thanks for your numbers. We'll see where we go. Thank you.
Kim, I would like to put, Madam CEO, I'd like to put you on the spot.
Okay.
We're looking at a multi-year project here. I assume like we're trying to look into the future with this concept. So really, we're going to start off with a very small scale Rockwood Terrace building first and then work that way. Am I correct in that way of thinking?
I think where we are not at the place to be able to make that decision yet, as far as how the construction phasing would best be organized. I think the relationships between some of these buildings of the uses and that may mean that we do a couple of things and then and leave maybe the last one until the other piece goes. I mean, the thing that's driving us the most is the 2025 date to get the new building up so that we can get our residents moved into the new appropriate space. And so what we can accomplish reasonably in that span of time, I think, is job one. And then after that, I think we're talking about cash flow and a number of other aspects of it too, depending on where we get to with the servicing assessment, et cetera, might also drive what we can do reasonably in a short period of time and that sort of thing. So I think we have work to do still to determine exactly what we want to get done in that initial build.
And that's what I was trying to politely sort of get to, was the cost and the impact on the taxation and everything else. It's like,
and look, and Kevin appears. It's like magic.
Kevin, any comments?
One question, like the mix that you have developed there in those 100 units that we're talking about, that is that mix based on a, is that based on what I'm getting a bad feedback here. Is the mix based on what you think would be like a revenue neutral, like that there'd be enough market rent there and that where you're subsidizing the affordable, that it would all work and there wouldn't be any additional municipal money going into that? Is that the mix that you're trying to capture there?
Yes, so the idea would be to have a mix that was self-sustainable without having to require any ongoing subsidy or funding from the county or anybody else. So you would want a mix of a good number of market and assisted living units to go together with the affordable or subsidized housing. We also are looking at taking advantage of some of the newer federal housing programs that have recently been released in the last couple of years. But you are right, the basic idea is to have a mix that would be self-sustainable to be able to have a long-term viable project.
Thank you.
Does that make our treasurer happier?
Oh, it helps.
Do we have any other questions from the committee? And I believe I can see everybody. Well, I can't see Mr. Warden.
Maybe, sorry, I could also just comment, the question was made about what are the costs we're looking at here. So the our study program includes coming up with a kind of a broad-based capital cost estimate in the next stage of the work that would show a ballpark what this entire campus might cost from a capital side, and then also looking at this whole issue of what's sustainable in a year-to-year operation. So we will be putting together that kind of analysis just to give a good sense of how this thing shakes out, both in overall capital cost and in year-to-year operations, looking at, again, the availability of some of these sources of funding programs. So we hope to have that answer for you by the end of the study.
Thank you for that, Ed.
Mr. Chair, I will just tell you that Councillor O'Leary had to leave the meeting.
Okay, sorry to hear that. Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Warden, are you still with us? Any comments?
He's driving.
Here, but yeah, I'm driving and I'm just listening. I apologize.
Okay, that's fine. Keep her between the poles.
We'll try.
Paul, I haven't heard anything. Any comments?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. All good information. I was listening all the way along, and but I will go back to the YouTube because I wasn't able to watch as closely the slide presentation, but I know a lot of that was in our package too. But I appreciate everything that the presenters, and yeah, it was all good. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So if I have no other questions from the committee, and I will thank the presenters. It's just amazing what you've done. It's a tremendous amount of work to date, and it's sure great to have such professionals looking at something that we're all dreaming about. So it's just amazing. I see Kim is smiling, so I know she's got a great load off her shoulders. Having you guys in place.
Well, we just want to thank you all for the opportunity, and we look forward to getting together again as we move toward the end of the work.
Thanks, Ed.
Thanks.
So, Madam,
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I do like the comment that Councillor O'Leary did speak to about flat roofs and slope roofs. I know, I understand the purpose of having flat roofs for mechanical, but slope roofs do seem to have less maintenance and all that. But I was listening along on I just wanted to make sure Mr. O'Leary was knowing that there was somebody else that supports his thinking there. So I wanted to pass that on. And I just also want to say, Mr. Chair, is the operation went well. The calf is sleeping, and now we just got to cross our fingers. So I will keep you informed. Thank you. Thanks for your patience.
Madam Clerk, I'm going to ask you for direction, please. We had a great presentation. Now we're going to move down to our reports. Should I have read this motion before we started, or?
No, the motion for Kim's report is there, and it just needs to be moved and seconded.
Okay. So I'll read the motion then first. The motion.
Can I just say that Dalton and Ed and Jerry, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. We really appreciate your time, and you don't have to stay for this next part if you have other duties to go on to. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, so I'll move on with our agenda then. I'm down to report CAORRP 0521 long-term care redevelopment project management services be received, and that the committee approve the release of RFP LTD 0521 for long-term care redevelopment project management services as draft, and that the RFP results and staff recommendations be brought back to the committee for direction. Someone to move to put on the floor, please.
I'll move that, Mr. Chair.
Moved by Brian, second by Christine. Now, Kim, do you wish to speak to this?
I do. Thank you so much. So we have had, I think, some initial discussions about the merit and need for having professional project management services on this project, especially as we try to move forward with 2 redevelopment projects at the same time. It is a really, really significant amount of work. And I think the more that we look into this, the clearer that becomes. So in the report, I speak to the project management services as we understand them. So they would be working with us to develop some of the things that need to go into that initial development agreement with the province. Like, as you know, we've been given approval to proceed. They accepted the applications that we put forward, but I won't feel confident that these 2 projects are really moving forward on a solid footing until we have those development agreements signed. And the only way to get those development agreements signed is to be able to provide the province with the project plans, the detailed project plans, and the budgets, et cetera. They're looking for drawings and all of that. And this is where we need, I think, someone to help us to coordinate all of that information. They will help us to bring on board the architecture and the other services that we need. Pre-qualified contractors when we get to that stage. And then I think another really critical phase when we get there is staying on top of progress on the construction projects. So these are the people that are going to be managing the change orders and bringing forward all of the information about progress and where the subs are at and all that sort of thing. They really do all of that work on our behalf. We have had conversations with one company reached out directly to us to talk about their services, and we had a really good conversation with them. But I am aware from our research that there are a number of very qualified companies that have made their business in supporting these kinds of developments. If anything concerns me, it's the fact that the province announced 90 projects yesterday. And so we are in some serious competition here for resources because we've never had this much activity, I don't think, in this space ever. And I think if we don't secure some good resources, we will struggle to get these projects done. So there's a draft RFP attached to this. We would like to be able to let that RFP, I almost feel like, given yesterday's announcement, I would like to suggest that perhaps we adjust the recommendation to allow the RFP to be let ahead of this going to council, just so we can get another couple of weeks ahead of the game here, because we're not going to make any decisions until we have this stuff come back. But the sooner we get out there, the sooner that these companies will know that we're looking for it. These services are not inexpensive. You're paying for a team of people who have deep expertise in all aspects of this, but it is an eligible cost from a overall project perspective. So some of those provincial funds that we receive for the project can be allocated to this, but I can't know for sure based on other projects that only had a single build associated with them. I wouldn't be surprised to see that this doesn't cost us $1 million. But that's where we are, I think. We're aware of another single 128 that came in at 600.
Wow. Kim, great comments. I do agree with your way of thinking, but I really don't think our terms of reference as a committee can make a commitment to anybody unless we take it back to county council.
I don't disagree with you at all. I just want to let the RFP and then let and let the responses come back? Are you not even, if you're not comfortable in letting the RFP even?
No, by all means, we should do it, but I just.
Okay, no, and then we'll have to go through the whole process to get it approved. I wouldn't want to go around that. You're right.
We may have a hanging off the chair when we get back to council.
Yes. Yeah.
Christine, I believe I've seen your hand up.
Sure, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Kim, that was a really thorough report. I do not have any questions on your report. I'm supportive of it. And I would move an amendment or a new motion just to indicate the recommendation from this committee to, or under the procedural bylaw, to waive that portion of it, to let the tenders, whatever the specific language is, Madam Clerk, that would be my motion. And I hope that there will be a seconder with Councillor Milne. Thank you.
Chair, and I would second that.
Oh, wonderful.
So, Mr. Chair, the amendment would be that a final clause be added to the resolution that states that staff be directed to release the RFP ahead of council in accordance with section 25.6B of the county's procedural bylaw.
Okay, that's as long as it's covering what we do. That sounds great to me. Sorry, I never heard who seconded.
Gordon Hicks.
Gordon Hicks. Okay, good. Is there any other discussion on the motion before us? Paul, go ahead.
So to be clear, are we voting on the amendment or the motion?
You are voting on the amendment first and
Thank
then
you.
put on the main motion as amended.
Yep, thank you.
Paul, you want to speak to the amendment?
Yes, can you just repeat the amendment? I was sort of switching from my iPad from my phone, please.
Of course. That a final clause be added to the resolution that states that staff be directed to release RFP LTC 0521 ahead of council approval in accordance with section 25.6B of the county's procedural bylaw.
And just to follow, thank you for that. And I guess the only option I was going to suggest, do you need a special council meeting? But that reference that you made, I presume that supersedes that, so that's fine. Thank you.
So just for clarification, Madam Clerk, this amendment, what it's going to do is going to allow us to put the RFP out to get quotes to come back, and then we will make the recommendation that time of which one we want to hire. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's correct. So it just allows that staff can release the RFP before we have council approval on the RFP process there.
Okay.
It's only 3:30 today. It can go out in about 10 minutes.
I think our treasurer has a question or a comment.
Go ahead, Kevin.
More of a comment that I did sit with Kim on the one presentation that we did get to the company that reached out to us, and like the amount of services that they're going to providing, from like furniture, operational readiness to move planning to financial advisory services and stuff. I just think we really need to do this when we're doing these two big projects. So I'm very supportive of putting this forward. I think we could easily make $1 million mistake if you're going to let staff that have never been down this road before. So I think this is smart planning if we put this out and see what we can get on this. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Kevin. It's always nice to have you a treasurer on your side. Is there, Paul, go ahead.
Just sorry, so I support this amendment and moving forward. But I guess on the other side, is there a way to communicate to the rest of the county council just what we're doing before it comes back? Like other than, so this minutes we'll get to, I guess, next week's, is it next week's or 2 weeks away from county council? Trying to think of the date.
It would be April 8th.
Right.
So is there any way for you, Kim, to send out just a note? I just feel it's always, because we're sort of moving quicker, just to communicate to council. Is that something we can do? Just the rest of council would be aware.
I think that's a great suggestion, and I can send out some other kind of background information if you think, or yeah, we can do it that way.
It's nice to keep county council informed. Yes,
I'm with you.
Is there any other discussion on the amendment motion before us? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
You're still on the road, Mr. Warden. We'll keep it that way. I heard you. Thank you. So it was carried. Now we have to vote on the original motion, Madam Clerk.
Yes, it'll be the main motion as amended then with that clause.
Okay. I do have a mover and I do have a seconder. I did not hear who the seconder was, but I think you have it, Madam Clerk.
So the original one was moved by Councillor Millen and seconded by Councillor Robinson.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that motion before us? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
That's sort of funny, but anyway, I understand. Okay, moving on for agenda. We are down to other business. Do we have any other business here today? Seeing none. Next meeting will be at the call of the chair, I believe. If we know that today need a motion adjournment. Kim, go ahead.
Good.
No. Moved by Paul, second by Christine. That we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
It's carried.
Have a good weekend, all.